What's up guys, Zero Skater here, and today we're going to be finishing up with the Battle of Legends Volume 2 deck reviews, this time of course ending with Yennenga. I've already done the others, so if you haven't seen them, go check them out. But Yennenga was probably the one I was least interested in going into the release, but after having played them all a little bit, I think she's crept up to probably be my favorite. I just love all of the little decisions that you have to make while playing her that end up making a big impact in your success. And so she's very difficult, but very rewarding at the same time. So really excited to do the deck review today. And of course, guys, the Battle of Legends Volume 2 release Rumble event is coming up soon. So if you haven't heard, definitely go check that out over at the Unmatched Tournament YouTube channel. But the registration will open up this Saturday, November 20th at 10 a.m. Eastern. So we can only hold 32 people for the event. If you're interested, make sure you sign up right away to secure your place. But we'd love to see you there. And as always, guys, be sure to attack the like button if you enjoy this video and subscribe for more Unmatched content. And let's not make you wait any longer. We will go check out Yennenga. So before we jump into the deck list, let's check out this amazing card back for just a second. This is probably my favorite one in terms of the color scheming. It just looks so great with that deep blue and the yellow accent colors. So big fan of this one. Let's move on. Alright guys, so to start off, we see the special ability card here. Now there's a lot to digest. I'm going to go over this very quickly because I'm not going to do a whole video on this in particular, but Yennenga's ranged. She's 2 move, 15 health. Her sidekicks are the archers, who are also ranged, and we know how powerful double ranged can be from Muldoon and his workers, so that's a very powerful team composition there. But the archers, interestingly enough, have 2 health, and there are 2 of them. So that's the first time we've seen a deck with multiple sidekicks that have more than 1 health, which is really interesting, and it doesn't seem like it would make that big of a difference, but it actually does in a lot of different circumstances throughout the game. We'll go over that a little bit more coming up here. But the special ability reads, if Yennenga would take damage, you may assign any amount of that damage to 1 or more archers in Yennenga's zone instead. So you may not assign more damage to an archer than their remaining health. Now that clause is just to say that if Yennenga is supposed to take 3 damage, she can't assign all 3 of that damage to one single archer because they only have 2 health, so you can't overkill them due to the ability. Now you can, however, give 2 damage to fully kill off 1 archer and 1 to the other, or you can choose to split it among all 3 and have each archer take 1 and Yennenga take 1, and you can really divvy it up as you please as long as the archers are in your zone. So that's incredibly powerful, and oftentimes you want to put Yennenga up front so that you have the freedom to distribute the damage most optimally. Because as we'll see later on, the healing in the deck does best when the damage is split amongst everybody, and there's also resurrection effects, and when you summon back an archer, they come back with the full 2 health, so if you're planning on using one of those, then you just want to let one die off in full. And so really it's just about maximizing your overall health pool. And Yennenga can get upwards of, I think, 35 essential health if you get all of her resurrection effects and max value on all her healing. And 35 health is just ridiculous, right? That's probably one of the highest health pools we've seen in the whole entire game, maybe barring Little Red or something. I haven't done the calculations, but it's huge. It's a lot of damage the opponent has to put in, so make them work for their damage, right? So if you're planning on taking a hit undefended, you probably want to put an archer up front, not Yennenga, because then any overkill damage is just wasted because the archer will just die off taking the hit. Whereas if you put Yennenga up front, then you might push the damage off to an archer, it'll die off, but then there's still that excess damage that Yennenga's going to have to take, or the other archer. So just think about being the most efficient that you can with all of your available healing and your total health pool. Make it as hard as possible for the opponent to deal real damage. And it's incredibly powerful if you can maximize the efficiency. And now we'll quickly talk about the difference between the 2 health sidekicks versus the 1. Now, oftentimes when they're 1 health token sidekicks, you want to put them up front, like with Robin Hood. You want to protect Robin Hood using the Outlaws, but again, you probably want to do the opposite in this deck, which is really interesting. But in the case that you do choose to put the archers up front, they can survive a lot more attacks than a 1 health sidekick could, because in 1 health sidekicks, any amount of damage kills them off. So oftentimes somebody will use something like a Momentous Shift, because it's guaranteed to kill off the 1 health sidekick, because if they faint, it's the 3 damage over the 2 and it dies, and if the shift actually gets its effect to bump up, 5 often kills over even the best defenses like a Skirmish, which are 4s, and so it's almost a guaranteed kill. Now, if the archers defend with a 4 into something like that Momentous Shift, they will take 1 damage, which means they won't die. There's still going to be a body on the board, which means that's a whole nother card your opponent is going to have to use to kill them off. So that makes a huge difference. 2 cards versus 1 is actually a big deal. And so also little effects that deal 1 damage, things like Wily Fighting, won't guarantee to kill off an archer like they would a token sidekick. Things like Medusa's ability or Dracula's ability, where they deal the 1 damage at the start of their turns, the archers won't die off. So that's a whole nother card or a whole nother turn of the ability used that it's going to take in order to kill them off in full. So 2 health actually makes a big difference versus 1, and you wouldn't think so. But also cards like a regroup. People often will go and attack 1 health token sidekicks with regroups because they assume the opponent is just going to take the hit because they don't want to risk defending and having it die anyways. So they'll just take it, and it ends up being the regroup, killing off the sidekick and drawing that player 2 cards, and that's a big power swing. So in the case of the archers, they can't just freely do that. I mean, they could, and maybe you take it and they draw the 2 off the regroup for winning because you just took it undefended, but it doesn't kill off the archer, which means again there's another card that has to be invested into killing that archer off. So the 2 health actually makes a big difference, and it's very, very powerful. Okay, let's finally get into the deck. So I know that was a lot, but hopefully I got over all the main points without it being too long. But here we see Shield Formation. It's a 3-value defense card that reads immediately, your opponent may discard a card. If they don't, return a defeated archer to a space in Yennenga's zone. Now this is a really strong effect because your opponent almost always wants to discard a card to prevent that archer from coming back. Because if the archer comes back, that means at the very least it's going to take 1 card to get through it, if not more. And if you're not getting through it, then it's like 2 health added to Yennenga, so that's really powerful. And so they almost always want to discard, and because of that, you can compare this to a Hiss and Slither from Medusa. Now, Medusa's is a 4 value, and there's 3 copies in the deck, versus this is a 3 value with only 2 copies. But we all know how powerful Medusa is, so even being close to that power level is very good. So Shield Formation is really strong in general, and it also being immediately, if the opponent attacks with like an offensive feint or a highway robbery, let's say, from the Outlaws, then they're still going to have to discard a card or let you get your archer back because Defenders resolves first. So that's just an interesting thing to note, and there are other interesting cases like against Beast Form, for example. This is almost like a 4-value defense because Beast Form has to discard cards to bump up 1 damage per card discarded, and since they're going to have to discard for Shield Formation, that's going to be 1 less card available to them to bump up the Beast Form. So overall, Shield Formation, it's almost like a Hiss and Slither, and that's very, very good. And next up, we're going to see another one of the resurrection effects. This one is Surprise Volley. It's a 3-value attack that says immediately, you may return a defeated archer to a space in the opposing fighter's zone. If you do, that archer is now the attacker. If you don't, gain 1 action. So there's 3 copies of this in the deck. So combined with the shield formations, that makes 5 potential resurrects on the archers, which if you count them each as 2 health apiece, that's like 10 additional health, which is huge. Now, this card is super interesting because if you don't want to reborn the archer, you can also use it as a combo card like a Jeet from Bruce Lee's deck, where you just get these big attack turns where you just keep chaining into more and more attacks and running the opponent out of defense and dealing massive damage that way. So this is the card, I would say, that is most difficult to play in this deck because you gotta think about what is your win condition. Are you trying to use the action gains to deal big damage by running them out of defense and playing a more aggressive style? Or are you trying to maximize the efficiency of your overall health pool and play more of a long game and just make it so you have too much health for them to even get through? So it really depends on the matchup, and you're going to have to gauge even just the current game state to see what's going to be best in that moment. And that's why I find Yennenga so fun, once again. So Surprise Volley is incredibly strong. Also, the fact that it is going to change the attacker to become the archer can come into play in certain circumstances. Like if you have somebody pinned, for example, and you don't want them to be able to use a leap away to get out of the pin. Normally, if Yennenga's attacking here and they win with the leap away, they can push Yennenga back and let them get out on their turn. But now, with the archer being the new attacker, the archer would be the only one they could move, which means they're not going to be able to push Yennenga out to escape that pin. Or against things like Counterpunch from Sherlock's deck. Counterpunch only involves the fighters in combat. So if you reborn an archer that is now the attacker, then the Counterpunch is going to hit the archer instead of Yennenga. And that's just insanely powerful. Surprise Volley has so much flexibility. It's also an any card, so even the archers can use it to revive the other archer, and that's pretty tricky because often your opponent will want to feint against Yennenga because she has some more powerful cards specific to her, and so feints are less likely to happen on the archers. And so I would suggest if you're trying to pull off a Surprise Volley, whether it be an action chain or just resurrecting the archer, you probably want to use this with an archer if at all possible. But overall, this card is one of the best cards in her deck. It's the most flexible and changes up her gameplay the most, and so it's probably my favorite. It's just an amazing card. And speaking of cards you want to feint, here for Yennenga we see her bonus attack called Rain of Arrows, and it's just a base 3 value attack that says after combat you volley, and volley again is just a base 3 value attack. So it's 2 3s in a row, so it's a very consistent damage output. 3s aren't hard to block, but if you don't block them, 3 damage is quite a bit to just take undefended. So you're going to have to use 2 decent defense cards to fully block this, and that's a lot to use. And so the opponent wants to feint this. You would deal the 1 damage still if it is feinted, but that prevents that whole second attack, which means it saves them a card. So because only Yennenga can use this, like I said, they're most often likely to feint on Yennenga's attacks versus the archers, so use that to your advantage. But Rain of Arrows is incredibly strong. When you pair it, especially with the Surprise Volley attack chains like we just talked about, you can get so many attacks in a single turn. And granted, they're only 3 value attacks, right? So they're not strong, but again, if you can start getting them undefended, that's where the bulk of your damage is going to come from. So if you want to play aggressively, this card is key, and it's incredibly powerful. And next, we're going to see the first versatile card of the deck. For Yennenga specifically, it's going to be Jaws of the Beast. So it reads, during combat, for each zone the opposing fighter is in, increase the value of this card by +1. Now, it seems like a pretty basic card on the surface, and it is for the most part, but this card can be crazy powerful. First thing, it's a base 4 defense, and you've heard me say this before, but base 4 value defenses are very good, even if there's no additional text. And that's minimum for this card, right? Because if they're in a dual or triple zone space, it could be a 5 or a 6 respectively, and that's an insane defense. We've only seen that from like Duality of Man from Dr. Jekyll, or Meditation from Willow, and so that's almost unheard of. So this card is crazy good as a defense, but also on offense, the fact that it can go up to a 6 on certain spaces is very threatening, and the opponent might want to feint this, but again, you can't feint everything. And so interesting to note is that this is during combat buff, so it's even better than if it was a flat 4 or 5, because against something like Deduce Strategy from Sherlock, the defender's effect happens first, so that would bump this down to a 3, which it already is because that's the boost value too, but then the attackers during combat would go after and bump up over the Deduce Strategy to deal the damage. So this is always going to deal at least 1 against Deduce, and that's pretty dang good because usually Deduce fully negates a card. Like even Bigfoot's Log, you know, it's a printed 6, but it's only got a 3 boost value, so that gets fully negated. But Jaws of the Beast, it's always going to bump up over something like Deduce, and there's other situations where that during combat buff comes into play and actually makes it better than if this was just a flat value card. Against something like, let's say, Beowulf's Equal of Grendel, right? You're going to take 3 damage by attacking into a Grendel with Jaws of the Beast, but if it's a 6, you're also going to deal 3 damage to Beowulf, and that's an even trade, and that's probably the best you can really ask for into a Grendel, honestly. So Jaws of the Beast is just really versatile, and you can use it in so many different situations, and it's just a strong card overall. And next, I'm sure you guys have probably seen this card before, but it's Point Blank. It's Yennenga specific, 2 value, versatile, reads after combat, if the opposing fighter is adjacent to Yennenga, deal 2 damage to that fighter. Now that's a really strong effect. You can compare it to like a Counterpunch from Sherlock's deck, and we all know how strong Counterpunch is. Now the only difference here is that this one can actually be feinted, whereas Counterpunch cannot, and that actually makes a big difference because This card, if you're using it to attack with when Yennenga's adjacent, they can feint because they know that this card could be coming out. They could also defend with something like a dash, which means since the defender's effect goes first, the dash will get them away from adjacency so that this doesn't trigger. So it's pretty telegraphed, but you can also use that to your advantage by attacking with something like a Jaws when Yennenga's adjacent to bait out their feint and still deal a damage over it, and you still have all the point blanks remaining. And with 3 copies in the deck, 6 auto damage is quite a lot, and you can pretty consistently rely on pulling that off. And you can also use this on defense if you're up against a melee fighter because they have to be adjacent to attack you. And since yours goes first if you're on defense, things like the dash won't get them away in time. You'll still pull off that auto. Granted that this card is pretty weak value, only 2, so you're likely doing an even trade because you're probably going to take around 2 damage on average from their attack, and then you're going to deal the 2 back to them. But even trading evenly with Yennenga's overall health pool that's available to her, I think is pretty favorable for you, so you should be pretty happy about that. And overall, that makes Point Blank quite a strong card. And then this next card is going to be the bane of existence for any deck with 1 health sidekicks, and that is Stallion Charge. So this card's insanely strong. It's a 3 value versatile for Yennenga that reads, after combat, move Yennenga up to 5 spaces. She may move through opposing fighters and then deal 1 damage to each opposing fighter she moved through. There's 3 copies of this in the deck, so that's just insane. It's such a threat when you could potentially take out all of Dracula's sisters with 1 card, or all of Medusa's harpies with the 1 card. It's just ridiculous, right? They're going to have to play around this card constantly, which means they have to spread out all their 1 health sidekicks, so that means they can't just use them to block you off from the hero unless they want to risk this card. And if they do decide to take the risk and you punish them with this, it's a huge punish. Now also, you can compare this card to like a Hoax from Bigfoot's deck. And Hoax is one of the best cards in the game, honestly. It's so versatile, being a big attack or a big defense, and 5 movement is a lot, and being able to move through people gives you freedom of positioning wherever you please. You can get out of pins with it, you can enact pins with it, you can set up to double attack somebody on your coming turn if you use it on defense and they attacked with a different fighter. So it's just very versatile. There's a lot you can do with it. And with Stallion Charge, it's only a 3 value versus Hoax's 4, so it's a little bit weaker, but that additional auto damage that you're getting for all the fighters that you move through is just massive. And again, it's just going to be a blowout against any deck with 1 health sidekicks, unless they really play around it. And for them to just play around it, even because of the threat that this card exists, is a benefit for you, because they're not going to be able to position their sidekicks optimally like they would have wanted otherwise. So Stallion Charge, just its existence is very good, and this card is insanely powerful, one of the craziest cards in the deck for sure. And now we're finally going to see the first scheme card in the deck, and this is One with the Land for Yennenga, and it says move each of your fighters up to 2 spaces, each of your fighters recovers 1 health, and then you draw 1 card. So when you look at this, it's basically just a maneuver plus heal, because moving each of your fighters up to 2 spaces is what you get to do when you maneuver, same with drawing the card, but in this case when you play the scheme, each of your fighters recovers 1 health. And this is the card where I said you want to split up the damage amongst everybody, because if both of your archers are alive at 1 health, Yennenga has taken some damage, you play this card, you essentially get 3 healing for 1 scheme card, and that's ridiculously strong healing. The most healing from a scheme that we normally see is 2. When you think about Calming Research from Jekyll's deck, that's a heal 2. So 3 healing is just crazy. And I know it's split among the archers and Yennenga, but again, if you put Yennenga up front, then she can divvy up the damage to the archers as she pleases. So it really is like 3 healing if you can heal everybody with it. So when you have this card, you definitely want to put Yennenga up front and split the damage between all 3 so that you can then play this and maximize your efficiency like I stated earlier. This card is ridiculously strong. I would not recommend using this card just to use it, right? Like, because it's just a maneuver plus heal, if you still have the potential to resurrect a dead archer and then get it down to 1 health later in the game, probably hold on to this card, because you can get more value out of it later on, and just do a simple maneuver instead. Now, if you're going to go over the hand limit and have to discard a card, you probably want to use this because then it'll keep you from having to waste a card, and you'll still get a little bit of healing even if it's not optimal. So you're just going to have to gauge that based on the game state. But One with the Land is crazy strong. It's got a ton of potential and definitely something to play around. But as the opponent, they're going to want to go for your archers first so that they can fully kill them off, so they don't give you maximum value with One with the Land, because it's just that powerful. So try to protect your archers if you can, especially when you have this card in hand. And the other scheme card in the deck is Master of the Hunt, and it simply reads gain 2 actions. Now that's really cool. We've never seen anything like this in the game so far. Basically all it does is reset your turn, and that means you have the freedom to, let's say, maneuver into range of the opponent, and then instead of just doing one attack and your turn's over, you can now play Master of the Hunt and reset your turn, so now you have a full 2 actions. It's like you started in their zone, and now they have a lot of pressure put on them, because you could be attacking with surprise volleys to be gaining actions. You could be attacking with Rain of Arrows to do multiple attacks with one card. You could be attacking with a Stallion Charge, and even if they play something like a Skirmish on defense, since your attacker's effect goes after theirs, the Stallion Charge lets you follow them and be able to make yet another attack with that other action you still have available. So Master of the Hunt is crazy good. It's very versatile because you can do, like I just said, for aggressive play. You can also use it defensively to get an additional maneuver, which means more distance between you and the opponent, as well as extra cards drawn if you really need the defense. And you can really just use this in a variety of different ways, and there's never one way to use this. And that's what's so cool about it. Again, Yennenga has a lot of options, and little minute decisions on how to use these cards is going to vastly change your outcomes. So it's really interesting, but Master of the Hunt is just super cool how simple yet effective it can be, and it's one of the most fun cards in the deck for sure. And now we're going to see our first archer specific card, that is Divide and Conquer. It's a 2-value versatile that reads during combat if your fighter is not in Yennenga's zone. The value of this card is 4 instead. Now that's really powerful on defense because, like we talked about earlier, it would let an archer survive something like a Momentous Shift because it's the 5 over the 4, but it only works if they're not in Yennenga's zone. And oftentimes you want to play with the archers in Yennenga's zone so that she can split up the damage using her ability, but then this card incentivizes you to keep them separate from Yennenga. And so that's just another little thing that makes it very difficult to determine the proper positioning, and it really just depends on the game state. And this card, again, being not just a flat value 4, but also buffing up to that, it matters against things like the deduce strategy example that we talked about earlier from Sherlock. And Divide and Conquer being a 4 value for the archer is really good, and most often I think you do want to use it on defense so that you can keep them alive even when they're not in Yennenga's zone, because I think if they're not in Yennenga's zone, you're probably using them to essentially corral the opponent within a zone so that Yennenga can get double attack turns off. And so the opponent might want to move up and attack an archer with something like a Swift Strike to let them kill the archer and then move out of Yennenga's zone so they're not set up for that double attack. But if the archer can defend with something like Divide and Conquer, that Swift Strike is not going to kill them off, and that means they're not going to be able to use that movement ability to get out of Yennenga's zone. Yennenga will be set up for her double attack. So I call it corralling when you do that, when you just kind of pin within a zone, and I think that's what the archers are really good at doing when you have Divide and Conquer, or any other of the cards that are good for them to defend with. And, I mean, Divide and Conquer, it's not the best card in the deck, but it definitely has its uses. And then the other archer card we need to talk about is Pin the Prey, and it's a 1-value versatile for the archers that reads after combat, move the opposing fighter up to 4 spaces, your opponent discards 1 card. So with these cards, there's 2 copies in the deck, that's 2 discards. With the shield formations, that's 2 more discards, that's up to 4 total, and Medusa has 6, so you know, you can compare it. It's not quite as good, but it's still pretty decent. And with this, the movement effect of it can be pretty good as well, because you could use this, for example, as a first action attack from the archer, move the opponent onto a tri-zone space, and then have Yennenga make a follow-up attack with Jaws of the Beast, which now becomes a 6, since you positioned them where you want them on that tri-zone. So that's pretty strong combo right there. And there's other uses for this card, and just the fact that they have to discard means they might have less defensive options for that follow-up attack. And you can use this on defense as well to set up a double attack turn for Yennenga when you wouldn't otherwise have been able to. And your opponent will be down a card, and I think having the opponent discard when it's their turn is better for you, because then they can't react to what you're going to do. If you use this as an attack when it's your second action and they discard, but then it's immediately their turn and they get to just double maneuver up, then it's not that threatening. But if you use it on defense and then now you're double attacking them and they had to discard a card, that's a lot bigger of a threat. And shout out to Baked Goods, he really explained that well in one of his latest videos. So go check that out. I think it was his Deadpool one. But yeah, Pin the Prey on defense, it's not quite as good, but it's better than nothing. They're still likely to die because it's only a 1 value, so even though they have 2 health, they probably still die. It's not super exciting. It's probably one of the worst cards in the deck, but it's got its niche case uses. And then we're going to see our first common card of the deck being Momentous Shift. Now, I talk about this one a lot. I use it in a lot of examples because it's a card that you're going to see very often, and it has a lot of good uses. So it reads, of course, during combat, if your fighter started this turn in a different space, this card's value is 5 instead. So that means this card is obviously better to use on offense rather than defense, because you can maneuver first, then attack, and it becomes the 5. On defense, it's very rarely going to trigger the effect to bump to a 5, and so a 3 value defense without any effect is not that good. But as an attack, it's very strong. There's 3 copies of this in the deck, and it's interesting to see this card in a ranged fighter's deck. Now, the only other time we've seen this so far is with King Arthur, because Merlin, the sidekick, is ranged, and he's got shifts in his deck. And using a Momentous Shift with Merlin can be very powerful from range. And same thing in Yennenga's deck. This card is crazy good, and it's another card that they want to feint, or else, you know, they're going to be probably taking some damage. And even if they feint, they take a damage, and they're down a feint. So it's great feint bait, and overall, you can use it to defend an archer as well and be pretty comfortable with them surviving, because only a 5 or higher would kill an archer over a shift defense, and oftentimes 4 value attacks are kind of like the standard, I would say. And so you can use it as a defense if you need to, and archers don't really have a lot of cards to defend with, so you might have to use it on defense. But that's why most often you want to put Yennenga up front, because she has so many more cards than the archers do to use on defense, so you're not going to have to take straight up attacks to the face, and the little bit of damage that might get over her like 3 value average defense value, you can just push off onto the archers anyways. So Momentous Shift is really good in this deck, and very powerful, especially because they are all ranged. And the very last card in the deck, another one of my favorites, it's Skirmish. So Skirmish is a 4 value versatile, reads after combat. If you won the combat, choose one of the fighters in the combat and move them up to 2 spaces. So again, I talk about this one all the time. It's in a lot of my examples. It's very common and very good. A 4 value flat defense is very strong. The extra movement effect that you can use this for is good as well, because you can avoid a double attack turn. If you win the combat from the first attack, you move yourself away from a melee fighter. Now you're out of range. You can use it as a first action attack and maybe kill off a 1 health sidekick of theirs because they don't defend. And then you use it to move forward into range of the hero and then hit them, and since you've moved, you can throw out like a Momentous Shift. And there's just so many options with Skirmish. It's very, very versatile. Again, this is one of the best cards to use for the archers on defense, because you're almost always going to live if you defend with a Skirmish, unless you're against somebody like Bigfoot who has 6s. But if they're using a 6 on an archer, I mean, do you even care that much at that point, right? So Skirmish is really good defense for the archers. You can use it as an attack as well for Yennenga if you are thinking they're going to feint, because this is her only printed 4, so it would deal 2 over the opponent's feint. So keep that in mind as well. And sadly, there's only 2 copies of this card in the deck instead of 3 like you normally see with Skirmish. But again, I'm happy to see it at all, and one of the best cards in the deck for sure. There's just so much versatility, and Skirmish is just Skirmish. And that's going to do it for Yennenga. So as you can see, there's just so much versatility in this deck, between the options of combos, between the surprise volleys or resurrecting the archer, or the different options that you're going to have with Master of the Hunt gaining you 2 actions. and the positioning involved, whether or not you want to hide your archers behind Yennenga to soak up extra damage and then heal it back, or if you want to spread them out and use them to corral the opponent so you can pull off double attack turns and be more aggressive. And there's just so many little minute decisions that are going to make a big impact in the outcome of your games. I think she has so many versatile cards that baseline she's going to be pretty easy to play. I think overall she's generally higher up on the power level just because of how good her cards are individually. But in order to maximize her and really push the limits of what she can do in competitive play, I think that's going to be very difficult, and it's really exciting and I think very fun to try to achieve that. And she's probably one of my favorite fighters yet again, just because of all the things I've already talked about. And give it a shot. I think just her versatility and the different game plans that she can execute is going to be very appealing to a lot of players. And you can really express your own individual play style by using Yennenga and, playing towards whatever you prefer. So definitely look forward to trying out Yennenga along with all of the Battle of Legends Volume 2 fighters coming up soon. I hear they are going to be putting them up for sale online on Restoration's website, I believe later this week, actually, or next week, but pretty soon coming up. And then, of course, don't forget to sign up for the Battle of Legends Volume 2 Release Rumble event if you want to try out all these new fighters in action, and we're going to see who comes out on top, because I really don't have much experience with these fighters against each other, and I'm sure not many people do, so it'll be interesting. And I think they're pretty well balanced within the box, so it's going to be a great time. Registration will begin Saturday, November 20th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, so make sure you register right away if you want to secure your place. And then also check out my Twitch channel. I will be streaming my own personal games if I'm playing in the event, and even if I'm not, I plan to do some feature matches where I'm going to stream others' games and maybe do some commentary over the top of that. So look forward to that. Check it out on my Twitch at twitch.tv/ZeroSkater12. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more of this kind of content. I'd really appreciate it. And leave your comments down below on what you think of Yennenga. And again, if you haven't seen the other fighter reviews, go check those out as well. And you can comment on those and let us know what you think of all these awesome new fighters coming out in Battle of Legends Volume 2. But that's going to do it for this one, everybody. So thanks again for watching. I'm ZeroSkater12, and I'll see you next time.